Yes, please go ahead.
3, 2, 1, starting the webinar.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of Climate Action Conversations, a webinar series by Green Earth Action Foundation intentionally curated to help people understand water conservation into their everyday lives and to make a meaningful impact for the environment. My name is Asmao Oniyongi, and I'm the project coordinator here at Green Earth Action Foundation. On behalf of the foundation, thank you so much for joining us today. And for those of you watching the live stream later, welcome, stick around, enjoy. It's going to be an insightful conversation. Before we dive in, I will briefly introduce Green Earth Action Foundation to you. Green Earth Action Foundation is an international nonprofit foundation in Switzerland, founded in Switzerland in 2023, with its headquarters in Geneva. Our mission is simple but profound: to promote global environmental conservation and to inspire sustainable living practices across the world. Our vision is rooted in three pillars: environmental protection, diversity and inclusion, and peace. The vision is the foundation for every initiative we undertake, ensuring that our efforts contribute to a world where both people and planet can flourish. Now, before we continue, I would like to recap on some of our key programs and projects. Last month, we just wrapped up our flagship initiative, the 429 Green Earth Ambassador Program, where we mobilized 20 ambassadors from 15 countries and in 4 continents. Our ambassadors led over 200 volunteers, over 1,700 participants, all gathered to implement hands-on projects such as reforestation, community cleanups, and they successfully collected over 50,000 kg of waste and planted over 5,000 trees in their different regions across the world. Last year, we introduced the Climate Action Conversations, which is what you have joined today. It is our global initiative where we intentionally have speakers from all over the world, policymakers, scientists, and activists who are addressing the climate change problems. Since its initiation, we have had different topics ranging from understanding climate change and food waste, how to achieve a sustainable lifestyle, and how to upcycle waste without compromising your lifestyle. We have also featured speaker partners across agencies such as Environmental Agency Abu Dhabi, Zayed University, Qatar University, Association Frigo, Compost State, Geneva Graduate Institute, and many more. This month, we kicked off our social media challenge, hashtag Save Every Drop, where we are encouraging individuals to post how they are saving water in their daily lives. We encourage you all to join in the challenge. All you have to do is post a video or a short post written as well about how you preserve water in your environment. Don't forget to tag us on Instagram. We are at GEAF.org, and use the hashtag Save Every Drop, hashtag Green Earth Action Foundation, and hashtag GEAF. As I mentioned earlier, we are a Switzerland-based organization positioned in Geneva at the heart of international diplomacy, with Geneva's unparalleled network of global organizations to influence policy and foster collaboration. Together, we can tackle climate challenges, influence international policies, and shape a future where humanity and nature can coexist in harmony. Now, to give you a brief plan of the webinar today, we will start off with a documentary that showcases the realities of water scarcity, and then we will go on to the introduction, and afterwards we will have a panel conversation to discuss water scarcity, and then water conservation. Stick around. We have a Q&A session at the end where you will have the opportunity to ask our speakers, all of our speakers, any questions that you might be interested in having. In the meantime, feel free to drop them in the chat box below, and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. Thank you. Now, to begin our program of events, we will start with Miss Ajonugwa Yahya, who is a passionate WASH advocate, water sanitation and hygiene advocate, deeply committed to addressing water scarcity and promoting sustainable water conservation practices in underserved communities. Her work centers on creating awareness about the realities of water scarcity and the importance of responsible water use, especially in vulnerable communities and IDP camps. Through storytelling, grassroots engagement, and educational outreach, she leads conversations that empower individuals, especially women and children, to see water not just as a resource, but as a shared right and responsibility. We will have a few words, possibly from her, and then we will showcase the documentary that explains her personal experiences growing up in a water scarce community in Nigeria, where she had daily struggles accessing clean water and how she is now transforming that and as a driving force towards change. Um, okay, so due to technical issues, we will just go ahead and have the documentary.
Before the sun graced our village, we embarked on a journey not of choice, but of necessity. Water, the essence of life, remained a distant dream. Ajopashi Odo, a village where tradition thrives and barter trade still holds value. Yet, beneath its beauty lies a silent struggle. Sometime before the cock crow, we rush with our empty bowls, sometimes bigger than our age, that we have to rush to the river to fetch yet unclean water. And before we get to rush to the farm, or if it's on a school day, we have to rush to the school after fetching of water. And life in Ajopashi Odo would have been beautiful, but due to water scarcity, it's never easy for us. Road to the water collection point is always rough and scary, but we have to beat the moment to ensure that we collect water for the household. Each day begins with a quest, traveling kilometers, facing the stings of bees, and enduring the weight of water, both physical and emotional. Dry season in this village, Ajopashi Odo, is like hell. The reason you are seeing green grasses here is because the rainy season is here, and farmers are running to the farm to ensure that they make use of the rainy season to produce food for consumption. And everybody, you can't see the youth or the men or the women, the boys, girls in the community now, because they are all rushed to the farm to ensure that they plant something in the soil. Diarrhea wasn't just an ailment, it was a recurring shelter in our lives. Remedies were scarce and understanding even scarcer. Water-related ailments like diarrhea and other were claiming lives of children under the age of 5 and sometimes and above. Women were losing their pregnancy, they were having miscarriages due to water-related ailments. And accessing healthcare wasn't an easy. It's like praying for a miracle to happen. We constantly lose children in the community, and sometimes because of lack of understanding, most of these ailments is attributed to witchcraft and other traditional readings. And so having to understand that, okay, this ailment have to seek healthcare was a big challenge for us. Books took a backseat to buckets. Dreams were deferred, especially for girls like me, shattered by the endless pursuit for water. As the boys get ready to rush to school early in the morning, the girls carry their bucket facing the stream direction. We need to collect water for the household, because when we don't collect water, then there will not be water to use later in the day in the house. So most time the girls are laid back, collecting water for the household, while the boys are in class, they attend assembly. The girls miss out mostly on important information and even miss out on subjects. Sometimes before we able to go to resume school in the mornings, after the break period where the first, second or third subject is already taught and over. And so most time the girls are taking the back seat in school, while the boys take the front seat, because the girl has to spend time collecting water for the household every day. Millions of people around the world are without access to clean water. The burden unfairly falls on rural communities, exacerbating health crises and hindering development. Water is a fundamental human right. Let's unite to ensure no one suffers in silence. Support initiatives, advocate for change, and be the ripple that leads to a wave of transformation. Save every drop. Every drop counts. Join us, be the change.
Okay, that was a lovely documentary that showcases the realities of water scarcity and what it does to an environment, to the health of children, as well as how it can affect their education as well. As you can see, the problem of water scarcity is beyond us. Um, and now, and that's why we have chosen to highlight this very important topic today. And up next, we are going to have Mr. Til Jaffer Sidon, who is going to talk to us more about the importance of water scarcity and water conservation. Mr. Till is an academic advisor at Abu Dhabi University, and she's also a master's researcher at the United Arab Emirates University. She's passionate about bridging science and community awareness, especially in the context of environmental sustainability. Through her work and studies, she aims to contribute to practical change in how we manage and value our natural resources. Today, Mr. Till will be providing us with key data and insights to introduce our topic of today around water scarcity and water conservation. Now, I will pass the floor to Mr. Till.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Satil Jafar, and I'm currently working closely with Dr. Ashraf and Dr. Asad in water research, specifically in producing green energy from microalgae and wastewater activated sludge. Today, we're going to talk and explore the critical issue of water scarcity and conservation, focusing on the often overlooked issue or topic of the hidden costs of water waste. Globally, approximately 2.2 billion people lack reliable access to safe drinking water, as per the United Nations report in 2024. Furthermore, the World Resource Institute's Aqueduct report indicates that by 2050, water demand is projected to increase by 55%, placing additional stress on the already scarce resource. Climate change also is worsening these conditions by reducing rainfall predictability and intensifying drought periods, specifically in regions such as the Middle East and North Africa, where fresh water availability could decrease by another 30% in the coming 2 decades. There is a verse in Quran says, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ, which literally translates to, and we have made from water every living thing. So the issue here is not only the limitation of water availability, but also it extends further than that. Water scarcity triggers severe ecological disruptions, including the loss of biodiversity, habitat degradation, and also ecosystem collapse. According to recent research in nature sustainability, approximately 60% of freshwater biodiversity has declined in the last 5 decades. That is due to water resource mismanagement and climate impacts as well. Also, socioeconomically, water scarcity disproportionately affects vulnerable populations, particularly women and children, by intensifying poverty, limiting education opportunities, as we saw in the documentary earlier, and increasing health risks such as waterborne diseases. On a positive note, despite these challenges, advancements in technology offer significant opportunities for water conservation. For example, smart agriculture technologies such as drip irrigation and precision sensors, they have demonstrated water usage reduction of up to 40%, as documented by the FAO's recent reports. In an urban context, decentralized wastewater recycling systems, as we call it, have achieved reuse rates of over 80% in several pilot studies globally. That drastically reduces the demand on freshwater sources. Now, to mitigate the hidden costs of water waste, adopting science-based water management and policy frameworks is essential. There's something called integrated water resource management, where all the stakeholders take accountability and take a part in actually dealing with this issue, and it's promoted by the UNESCO. It encourages collaborative water governance informed by accurate data and scientific forecasting models. Research published by the International Water Management Institute emphasizes the role of community-driven initiatives combined with innovative technology. So both of these parts give a critical part or make a critical impact on the sustainable water use and management. So all in all, to conclude, addressing water scarcity and waste requires immediate and coordinated global action rooted deeply in scientific research and technological innovation. So let's use our collective knowledge and commitment today to ensure water security for tomorrow. Thank you. Looking forward to the great discussions going on today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Till, for such for great insights. I think what stands out to me the most would be that you can see the social effect of water scarcity with when you reiterated talking about how education can be affected, as well as the environmental effect with the ecosystems being destroyed due to water scarcity, being affected by water scarcity. Up next, we will have we'll dive more into the topic of water scarcity in a panel conversation with Miss Alicia Doth. Miss Alicia is a dedicated environmental and water stewardship professional with over a decade of experience driving sustainability and resilience across sectors. She's currently serving as Water Assurance Technical Lead at the Water Security Collective here in the United Arab Emirates. She guides organizations through internationally recognized water certification frameworks. She conducts audits and develops strategies that promote responsible and equitable water use, which is highly important to solving the problem of water scarcity and water sanitation. With a background spanning environmental consulting, project management, and corporate social responsibility across Africa and the Middle East, Ms. Alicia is deeply committed to empowering businesses, industries, and communities to become true water stewards through public speaking, capacity building workshops, and technical leadership. She inspires collective action towards securing water resources for current and future generations, which is why we do this, to create sustainable impacts. Thank you so much for joining us today, Miss Alicia.
Thank you so much for the introduction.
And if you have any questions for Miss Alicia or Mr. Till or Miss Ojonugwa, don't forget that you can always drop them in the chat box, and we will get into it at the end of the webinar, where we will have all speakers answering your questions. Okay, but for now, we'll be asking our questions and making sure you have a good time and enjoy the conversation. Uh, so, Miss Alicia, can I get started with the first question?
Yes, let's get started.
Okay, thank you so much for accepting our invitation once again. Okay, so my first question to you would be, what are the primary drivers of water scarcity at the global level, and how is climate change contributing to the intensification of this crisis?
That's a good question, and I'm going to try to answer it in a way that everybody can relate to what it means. But I wanted to start off with just introducing water terms, because there's many water terms, and I think some of them are used interchangeably, but there are some differences. So just a quick sort of snapshot of all these different water terms when we say water demand, water use, water consumption, water stress, water risks, water security, water scarcity. It's a lot. It's a lot of water, and each thing plays its part, and some of them can be happening at once, and some can be a cause and effect. So today we are talking about water scarcity. However, I think it's really important that we understand all the differences of what a water demand is and how we're using it, because that all goes back to how we conserve it, how we're consuming it. The environment also consumes water as well, so it's important to understand how water is being consumed, where it's being consumed at. And then the stress of it is, when we have more demand than we can provide. And then looking at water risks, that's a very important part of looking at water scarcity, is because we must know that the risks that are being presented, and those can be a number of risks as well, whether it's from infrastructure risk for water infrastructure, whether it's a risk to the environment, whether it's the water quality risks. So there's a lot of different forms of when we're looking at water and the terminology, but we'll just keep it to sort of water scarcity at this time, for the point of the discussion. So I would urge everyone to sort of, if they're interested in this, to become familiar with all the different terminology, how they work together, and again, the cause and effect of that. So water scarcity is that sort of long-term way that we look at water, meaning where is it? Do we have enough for the future? Do we have enough for now for everyone? And that's, I think, every drop counts, save every drop. That's where water scarcity really comes into play, is because we might have water scarcity in different parts of the world for different reasons. And I don't know if everybody's familiar with the phrase is, water, water everywhere, not enough to drink. Now, that sort of can be something that can be adopted everywhere, is because water quality is also a big issue that we face globally as well. Is because it doesn't matter how much water we have, is it suitable for the needs that we require it for? So water scarcity can mean many things. You could be in an environment where you have lots of water, but if you don't have the infrastructure to maybe treat it, if you don't have the nature that's there to treat it naturally, it's all going to become scarce for us, because we need water in a certain condition to be able to use it for some of our needs. And so I think that's where I wanted to sort of start the discussion. So again, it starts with natural activities like climate change, as well as some of our human and anthropogenic activities. So we're also sort of contributing to water scarcity in the way that we're using it, and maybe we're not using it sustainably. And we might have a lot of different industrial needs that we need water, agricultural needs. We might have poor water governance. So this all sort of leads to water scarcity in general. But when we were speaking about climate change, of course, we know that there's a lot of variances of climate changes, and we're experiencing it differently depending where you are in the world. But we know that we're either not getting enough water or we're getting too much water, just to put it simply. And both of those are challenges that we should, be prepared to meet, whether in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And so when we look at this, it's either we're dealing with floods, we're dealing with droughts, or we're dealing with having both in, within our different climate, and our weather and patterns are changing. So essentially, this climate change means we're not equipped to capture the water when it comes, or we're not equipped to maybe get water when we need it the most. So I think in simple terms, when we're looking at global water scarcity, it's on those sort of two extremes. And how do you prepare yourself for those extremes and everything in between as well? And I think that's where the whole world needs to be on board and be prepared for their water scarcity challenges that might be specific to their area.
Wow, yes, I definitely agree with you. And I think some of the key things that you said that really stands out to me is also about how water is doesn't it just doesn't relate only to humans, it only relates to our environment as well. The environment also consumes water, and other reasons why I think we could also think that the water scarcity problem continues to increase could also be because of the growing population, perhaps. The demand for water we've seen a surge in the population, and hence we would have an increase in the demand for water, but instead the supply has been reduced, and also it's finite. There's no infinite water in the world. It's only a very small percentage of it is consumable by human beings as well. And that takes me to the next question I have for you, Miss Alicia. Um, so what do you think are the key environmental impacts of ongoing water shortages? Speaking of the environment, particularly on ecosystems and biodiversity.
And that's a very important question. It's because we understand, and I think over the last 5 to 10 years, the reports have been coming out on how important the ecological and biological benefits are to, sustaining us, whether it's from the marine life, whether it's on land. It's our ecosystems are there to serve us for a reason, and they've been there long before us. So the moment they start to give us signals that they're degrading, it's sort of our chance to ensure that we're protecting it, because when water moves through the environment and we get in its way, or we're polluting it, we're also risking ourselves. And I think the nature is there for a purpose. And so we have to be really aware of how we are limiting any of those impacts, whether it's, we don't want to discharge water quality that's in poor condition. We have wetlands that are becoming more vulnerable in some parts. In Zimbabwe is where I worked and I lived for quite some time. Wetland protection was a huge thing because people need space to live. And like you said earlier, of course, yes, urban development and expansion, and then also areas for us for livestock as well as for agricultural needs, we start encroaching in sensitive areas, and wetlands seem like a sensible place to develop when it's not raining, when wetlands aren't doing what they do best, and that's sort of ensuring that there's no flooding. But wherever we are in the world, we have some sensitive habitat, and we need to be aware of what that sensitive habitat is. What is it doing, and what do we need to do to protect it, and what else is relying on that? It's never just as simple as sort of one species that might be there. It might be a whole chain. And so this is a great topic. I'm not an ecologist specialist, but however, I work with these ecologists because it's important that we do work together on these matters, because the water quality can also impact different species that might be required to be in this habitat, which might have a longer impact on whether we're having stabilization of soils. We want healthy soils, so everything is built upon each other. And so if we look at a river and maybe it's reducing water flows, we can assume, and we have evidence that this also means food chains are broken down, and then this can affect communities as well that might rely on these rivers for some of their food sources. So everything comes back and everything is linked. So water scarcity can really contribute to that, because I think we have the spread of invasive species, we have disturbed environments, and there's a whole list. And of course, I don't want to go through each one now because it's a topic within itself. But I know that it's important from a water perspective, and for water stewardship, which I specialize in, is that we are all taking that responsibility to ensure that whatever we are doing is not impacting the environment from one way or another, is being aware of where we're getting our water from, and obviously being more aware of how we're discharging any wastewater from our site, and if there's any potential opportunities to recover any of our wastewater, to ensure that it might not be going out to the environment, or at least using it as much as we can. So it's a great question, and I think that there's many important topics to cover with this specific question, but this is how I see it from a water stewardship perspective on what we can do to ensure that we are reducing any impact to the environment.
That's really interesting to hear, because I also came across a research done by the UN Water, and it basically says that since the 1900s, the world has lost half of its wetlands. And a lot of people might think, just like you had said earlier, people might think that this is quite distant, but they don't realize that rice, which is a staple among most households, comes from wetlands. So it still comes back to us. And just to reiterate on what you said as well, it goes back to the food chain. So even though it's an environmental problem, we humans are directly also impacted by it. Environmental problems and human health are directly correlated. So yes, it's highly important for us to preserve these ecosystems, wetlands, and our biodiversity in order for humans to live healthily and also for the environment to flourish. And yes, now my next question to you would be about the misconceptions about water scarcity. What misconceptions do you think people have related to water scarcity?
I have a lot of them, but I'll start with the top ones. But to go back to that is, we also have to remember that it's just not how we're impacted by water scarcity. It's about how we're impacting water scarcity. So we need to sometimes just open our lens up to see, a full 360, because it's never as easy as just looking at tunnel vision at water. There's a lot of other aspects at play here. So that's what I also want people to take away with them as well. It's never easy. Although I always appreciate all the experts in the field, because we all have vital roles to play in this. I just hope that we can make sure that we communicate them together, and then we, cross collaborate, that we need to achieve a common goal of water security. So I think a misconception, I'll just start with one of them, is that water scarcity is only in hot desert environments. I think sometimes people forget that water scarcity is not just a desert, which is what I think a lot of people believe, because a lot of the time we have the images, and it's about how we frame and how we communicate those stories of, okay, water scarce because it's in the desert. And that's not always the case. There's many, water scarcity can look like anything. It just is, what it means is we are not having enough water for what we need for a variance of reasons, whether it's, the infrastructure is not available to provide it to us, or we don't have the distribution networks, which would be part of the infrastructure. So that's one misconception, is water scarcity is only in deserts. Another misconception is, okay, we have enough rain, or we had a great rainy season, we're all good to go. Well, that doesn't mean anything. It's about, are we collecting that rain? How are we collecting it? Are we storing it? What are we going to do with it? All these sort of restoration values and mindset that we have for water when it comes. So it doesn't matter if you have a great rainy season. It's everything that happens, that has to be set up in place to ensure that it's optimizing those rain events as well. And then another common one, and this isn't to, demotivate everyone, because I think every drop does count. So we all need to take that responsibility, especially in our own homes and our personal lives. But turning off the tap is not going to solve it. I think we need to dig a little bit deeper. So this is where I like to work with people, and of course, not to discredit anything. Turning off the tap is important, and I think turning off the tap when you're brushing your teeth, or not wasting at home, all those things you can do at home is very important. But what I want people to sort of go to the next level, meaning thinking beyond that and thinking about other ways that they can really ensure that they're reducing water at their home, and that can be as little as what does your garden look like. That could be what other sort of technologies that are available for us to bring into our house to reduce that, whether it's low flow efficiency measures. So there's a lot, and it can become a little bit overwhelming for a person to sort of take all those responsibilities on their own merit. But I think we have to. It's about time that we now sort of take that responsibility, because we're the only ones that, in the end, will be accountable for the water that we use. And I think one of the other last ones I wanted to touch on is technology. It's great. There's a lot of it available, but it's not going to solve everything. Again, it goes back to, we also have the role to play, to be able to know when to use the technology for what, how to use it, and its benefits. So let's not just say, okay, great, we have the technology to treat it. So here in the Middle East, we do have a lot of desalination plants to be able to supply us with drinking water. We can't just assume that that's available, and we shouldn't do any other preventative measures for that because we've got a solution. It's an ongoing process, and I think that we shouldn't always say technology is going to solve everything. It's about how can we use this technology to enhance, what we should already be doing, and taking that responsibility. So I think those are, what I can see as the misconceptions when I speak at different events, or I come across different clients. These are sort of feedback that I've seen. I've done water stewardship audits. This is the feedback I get from the sites and their perception of it. So, no water has waste. And of course, the water that we have here today has been here ever since the planet existed, like you briefly said before. Yeah. So there's no waste in it. It's about how are we using it, how are we recovering it, and what are we doing to take responsibility of that. So restoring our aquifers, finding ways to recover that water and making sure that we're using it responsibly are really the key points. And I think those misconceptions, we need to start, becoming more aware of how severe the problem is, but how we can really use those solutions to sort of tackle this issue.
Yeah, I think my biggest take from what you've just mentioned is about the desertification and how deserts are usually misconstrued as being related to water scarcity. And just because an area is full of deserts or dry land, it means it's water scarce. Because I think that's also a misconception that I myself also believed for a really long time. So thank you for debunking that. And also with the technology, yes, it's good that like there are certain technologies available that are helping with it, but but there's so much more that hasn't been done, and it's not the only solution. And yes, also with the individual solutions that we are currently having, like the one you mentioned of switching off the tap, I don't know, it really gets me curious on like what community-based solutions do you think that we can all incorporate in our day-to-day lives?
Yeah, and it's important. I mean, community is important because the water doesn't belong to any of us. It doesn't belong to anyone, actually. So water is sort of that resource that we should all be mindful of. And when it comes to a community, that can be within a community where you live in or reside in. So I think it depends, at the macro and micro level that you want to look at the community. But I know of a lot of community programs, and this could be where water stewardship also comes into play, is because if there is a specific site that are seeking to get water stewardship certification, it's important that they go out in the community as well. So it's about understanding the community's water challenges, and then how can they contribute to that, especially if they might be in industry where consumes water and it might impact the community. But for the community, I believe that the community needs to come together to sort of take action to have some sort of initiative that's going to better that community, whether it's at a household level, or whether they have a local wetland or they have a nearby river. So it's also about understanding where that community sits and what those challenges are. So I think the most common ones that do get a lot of attention are, the green roofs, or some of the communities that have areas where they can collect rainwater as well. So you've got the green roofs that can collect rainwater. So it does depend on the environment that you're in. But for example, here in a community where I live in, I make an effort with my neighbors to sort of make them more aware of water efficiency and leaking taps. And we have storage tanks here, water storage tanks at each location we live. So checking them for leaks, how they can be aware of when they should be watering their garden. So I think the community approaches can come in many different forms. It's just based on those challenges that community might have. Some communities in Zimbabwe might be rural areas. They might be a little bit more prone to having sort of groundwater contamination because they might have shallow wells that they rely on. So I think as long as the community has a way to collectively come together, discuss those challenges, and then also there might be somebody in the community working on water stewardship. A community can work on water stewardship. You don't have to be certified to sort of do sort of these water stewardship initiatives. I think water stewardship is something for everyone, and there's parts of it that we can all sort of harness and take on board. But a lot of communities in the Middle East are becoming more aware here of our efficiency measures. So having the fixtures in place, having sensors in place, having timed irrigation, all these little things add up, and having appliances as well that might consume less water. So I think at a community level, it's about making everybody aware of those sort of challenges that we might have in a community. But of course, this might look like something different in each community level. So this is just some examples that I have, and this is what I see in the environment that I'm currently in as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. It all starts from doing the research in your community to find out what the problem is first. So you first identify the challenge, before going on to solve solve it in a customized way that fits your specific region. So as she mentioned earlier, as Miss Alicia mentioned earlier, from solving water scarcity in Zanzibar will look very different from solving it in the UAE or some other parts of the world. But definitely, I agree. You have to come together with your community and find out what works the best, and then go on to implement it. And that's why also here at Green Earth Action Foundation, we're doing this kind of great work to promote the awareness on water stewardship, to make sure that people know that it's not just a professional action. You on your own, as as an individual, can be an environmental steward and work towards conserving your water and against water scarcity. Now, it's been interesting what the data has been looking like least recently with water scarcity. And I would just like to know your outlook on what you see the trends looking like in the next 10 to 20 years, in the case that the current approach to water doesn't change.
That's good. So I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't foresee the future. However, based on what we see now and what's projected and what you read and what you can understand, it's not a question of if, it is a question of when. And I think we have some stats earlier that presented. We 2030, there'll be a certain amount of water availability per person. 2050, we've got sort of these timelines, and maybe people sort of get, well, what does this mean? Are we going to run out of water in 2050, or 2030 is just 5 years away? So I think it's about, we know that we're in a vulnerable state, and I think everybody's aware of that. But if we're looking at the next 10 to 20 years, we can't sit around and wait for things to get better, because we already see that, water conflict has already started. And unfortunately, water is an easy target, because once you remove that, it's, it can really have a cascading impact to society and to the environment as well. So I'm hoping that, that's not a global water situation we want to address, but we need to, and that's water conflicts, because ongoing disputes globally can really threaten our water resources and how it's distributed, where it's going, and any infrastructure involved in that. But water shortages as well. A few countries, we all know Cape Town has had water shortages, as well as Spain. I think that was just last month. A city in Spain also had a similar scenario of water shortages. So I think that's definitely something that more cities and communities should be a little bit more aware of how to handle of the shortages. And that basically means when the city can no longer provide the water demand for that city and its uses. And then I think over the next, was this 10 to 20 years we're looking at, food security is also a big one as well, making sure we have enough water for our food security. I know we have a lot of vertical farming and different ways of farming now, a lot of unconventional ways for food, but, we do know that water and food, our water-food nexus is important, so we mustn't ignore that. So I think that'll get a lot more, and that is getting a lot more attention, is we need water, we need food. How are these two gonna work together? And then I think the global water situation, like we said earlier, is biodiversity. Is how we're ensuring that our natural ecosystems, our natural environment, are getting the water that it requires to be healthy. Because water quality is one of our biggest risks, I believe. Because do we have enough infrastructure? Do we have enough of it with the latest technology to be able to treat the water that we need to be able to make it fit for our use, so to make it potable for us to drink, essentially. So I think water quality is that one thing over the next 20 years we'll definitely have to have more awareness on, is what does that water quality look? Because like I said earlier, it doesn't matter how much water we have, if it's not fit for our use, then we're in a big problem. And that's something that I think that as it evolves, of course, the technology will be there to support us, but we must also be very aware of our water quality and what we're doing and what we can do to prevent water quality from deteriorating more, as well as reducing any poor water quality for impacting the environment, because we know that that will also have negative consequences in many different forms if it's impacting the environment as well. So there's just my few ideas, what I personally believe, over the next 10 to 20 years based on the information that I've been working on.
Absolutely. The water quality really is the key to the two essentials of life, water and food, because as you had mentioned earlier, they are both connected, water food nexus, and we really have to ensure that even though the water would be available, it is good enough to be used by people. And that brings me to the end of this panel conversation. Thank you so much, Miss Alicia. It's been a great overview of how water scarcity affects us as human beings and what we can do about it. It's been great learning so much from you. I've learned so much, and I'm sure the rest of the audience have. If you have any questions, don't forget to leave it in the chat box, in the Q&A chat box below. And at the end of the webinar, Miss Alicia will be here to answer your questions. Thank you so much. And now we will head over to the next panel, which will be moderated by Green Earth Action Foundation's very own Miss Maureen. Miss Maureen is our project assistant over here at Green Earth Action Foundation. And yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to you, Asma, and thank you also to you, Alicia, for this very interesting conversation. I think you've really helped open up the topic in a very meaningful way. As I guess too often, water scarcity is very much misunderstood as an issue only affecting arid or maybe distant regions. But I think today's discussion made it very clear that it's a global challenge shaped by climate change, mismanagement, also growing demand, and most importantly, one that requires all of us to rethink how we value water and also how we use it. So thank you so much for this. We will now transition to a second panel, which will focus on water conservation. In this discussion, our speakers will highlight the urgent need to shift from passive water use to active stewardship. They'll be sharing practical strategies, innovating solutions, and real-world success stories that show how conserving water at home, in business, but also across communities can generate meaningful and lasting impact. But before diving into the subject, I would like to introduce our two experts for this panel. So first, we have Dr. Bapun Fahoudin. He is an international climate and water expert with over 20 years of experience in disaster risk reduction, climate resilience, and early warning systems. He currently leads the water sector at the Green Climate Fund, supporting climate investment that enhance water security in vulnerable regions. Prior to this, he worked with organizations such as the Asian Development Bank and UNDP, leading projects across the Asia Pacific and also beyond. He is a trusted advisor to governments and international bodies and served on several expert committees, including the WMO and the International Science Council. His work bridges science, policy, and practice to drive sustainable and climate-smart solutions globally. Dr. Fahoudin, thank you so much for joining us today. And our second expert, Dr. Pascal Richard, who is Director of Climate and Sustainability at Deloitte Hong Kong, where he leads strategic sustainability projects across multiple sectors. He also serves as adjunct assistant professor at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology and teaches at the University of St. Gallen here in Switzerland. With a PhD focused on the social acceptance of renewable energy systems, his expertise spans project management, consulting, risk advisory, but also policy. Prior to Deloitte, he led work at private firms and NGOs, including the Global Institute for Tomorrow, guiding organizations toward net zero strategies and socially inclusive energy transition. He blends academic research with practical solutions, inspiring sustainable impact and community-driven change. So thank you both for taking the time to join us today. As mentioned earlier, if you have any questions during the panel, feel free to just submit them in the Q&A box. We will turn to your question during the Q&A session right after this panel. And now, without further ado, let's begin our second panel discussion. My first question would be for you, Dr. Fahoudin, because as mentioned, you're currently leading work in the water sector at the Green Climate Fund. I was wondering if you could tell us about how the fund defines its strategic priorities when it comes to water, and also what key areas of investment or impact it focuses on. Dr. Fahoudin, I don't know if you...
I was actually talking myself. Thank you so much, Maureen, for inviting us. And thanks for the previous panel for actually setting up the ground and as well as an overview, which was quite, I think, helpful for the audience. As a fund, so I don't know how many of you know about the Green Climate Fund. So we are the largest climate fund with a mandate to implement the Paris Agreement. And we provide a catalytic financing through project program readiness support to the countries. And we are quite innovative in a sense because we use the various financial instrument and flexible financial instrument with a mandate of 50% adaptation and 50% mitigation side. So that means we cover actually the mitigation area where we try to reduce the emission. At the same time, we do the adaptation where actually we try to support to the people. So when people actually wants to access the climate finance architecture, the way it works through the NDC and the NAP. So NDC, which is National Determinant Contribution. As a country, you define actually what is your mitigation or adaptation vision, and then through the risk assessment or climate risk assessment, you try to define actually what is your adaptation plan. So if you look at your climate change adaptation plan, or what we call NAP, water play a very critical role actually within the NAP. So any NAP you look at, out of 3 priority areas, water could be one. Either it could be first priority or maybe a third priority, because water actually interconnected for all the sectors, elements that we are talking about. And as we also heard about, that water doesn't have a boundary. So it actually cross over the jurisdiction areas. So when you're actually trying to design a water project or any actually climate change project for climate financing access, we as a fund, you have to follow some metrics, what we call like a 6 metrics. One is actually a project that you actually bringing to us, how that actually create a climate change impact in terms of beneficiaries on adaptation or reducing the emission. then we need to look at actually the paradigm shift. So how actually the project is actually scalable beyond the project period, what kind of innovation you're bringing to the projects, so that actually the way actually the traditional work we used to do, because of the emerging changes, we think that actually the solution may need to change or adapt accordingly, and what are the new solutions you're actually bringing. And third, actually the sustainable development. So how actually the project that you're designing for water is actually covering other sustainable development goal, not only just SDG 6. And then it need to be have a more actually the need-based solution, because when you're talking about water, it's actually very localized. So when you're talking about a climate change changing, 20 years rainfall may be actually changing to a 20% reduction or 10% addition. What does it mean to a small farmer who's actually sitting in a small catchment? And is it meaning actually he'll be having more flooding, or is it actually he will have a drought in his situation? And what kind of mitigation measures he need to be taking? And that's sometimes actually quite difficult to understand, because you need to do that kind of analytics through a data-driven analytics or an evidence-based analytics. And unless you have that kind of scientific background, it's very hard to actually define to that kind of narrative to justifying your financing. And then the last one is actually that how actually also a project that you are asking align with your national policy and plans. As water is interconnected to everything, so you need to make sure that actually NDC, NAP, National Development Plan, your water plan, your sustainable plan, or agriculture plan, all are actually interconnected horizontally as well as vertically. And finally, anywhere you want to invest your money, you always need to look at actually what are the return of it. Either it could be financial return or it could be economic return. So that is actually quite important to look at. So these are the six fundamental criteria or metrics you need to follow. But then if you look at actually that how GCF is actually driving to the water, because we actually having a quite large portfolio of water project into the market. We are already mobilized together with our partner more than $3.5 billion in the market for the water related project throughout the globes. And when you're actually designing a water project on the climate angle, as our previous speaker mentioned about it need to be start from behavioral change from your own self, so from ourselves. So it cannot be just a policy plan. So how can actually we think water as an asset class, so that actually you think it's not just free goods. When you use it, we use it as a value and as an asset. That is one of the things we always try to look at. And secondly, we try to look at actually how we create an innovative and fit for purpose financing system. You may see over the last 50 years, most of the project is actually grant based. And when there is a grant based project, project ends, everything actually ends on that page. It doesn't actually keep continuing. So how can actually you bring for purposeful and fit financing? Because when people use water, they pay for money. So then why we cannot actually have those sustainability into the financing, or why actually we still have a sort of 40 to 60% non-revenue water loss? So that need to be a little bit actually look after that. What are the assets we are talking about? How we can actually create those financial business opportunity. And thirdly, looking at the transboundary, because as water works through the catchment or river basin, and we always need to look at actually how those actually overall basin is actually working, either it's upstream, downstream, and we cannot just play with the blame game that upstream actually benefiting, downstream is suffering, downstream suffering, upstream benefiting. So we need to bring them together to collaborative platform to work together in a more cohesive way. And then the fourth one is actually more on adaptive and agile governance systems. So if you look at in the developing countries, or even in the developed countries, I'm coming from New Zealand, we have also a huge non-revenue water losses in our country itself. So it's because of the governance system is actually quite weak. At the same time, actually, often the asset belongs to the public, and then we want actually the private sector to come, but there is a huge gaps between the risk element between the private and the public sector. So how actually you create that kind of enabling environment is actually quite important. And unless you have a good governance systems, it doesn't work in the right way. Fifth, looking at the dynamic policy as well as innovation engine. So we often actually do a lot of research in the university. There's no shortage of research that our PhD, our masters, our bachelors are doing. But look at actually how much of those research is actually coming to the operational domain and how many of those research actually then translating to the operational domain to the community. It's very few. And one of the reason is that actually we do only piloting, we do incubator, we actually doesn't do that as scalability because there is no such kind of embeddedness on the innovation into the policy dynamics and how that could be scalable through the country or through the region or through the transboundary river aspect. And finally, we also try to look at actually the how you can actually think about water or water as a circular economy. So as there is a potentiality water to play a mitigation and adaptation role, we can easily actually create a circular water economy into this space. So these 6 metrics for the project design and 6 metrics for the when you're actually looking at water to drive to the project element. These are the 2 things actually quite important when you're designing the projects. So that's how we normally try to look at water investment. Hope that's helped.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for this. I think it's always very important to explain also how the funds are working in practice, especially for the general public, to help them understand not just the financing itself, but also the mobilization and the mechanism behind it. So I think it's always really helpful to have such explanation. Dr. Visha, so far we explored water conservation. I think in general terms, we also just mentioned the Green Climate Fund. And through the documentary, we've seen very, very much local impacts in regions like Nigeria of water scarcity. I'd now like to turn to another concrete example and make a sort of comparison with these 2 contexts. So Switzerland is often perceived as a water-rich country, but how accurate is that perception today, given recent climate variability, but also the increasing water demand?
Great question, right? And thanks a lot, Maureen, for having me here as well. Great to be amongst these esteemed experts. And, I'm happy to provide a bit of a Swiss perspective, right? And I think talking about misconception and different perceptions, it is true that, Switzerland is frequently described as water rich, right? We do have lots of lakes, rivers, still some glaciers as well, right? We also have a rather high annual precipitation levels. So from that perspective, that's not necessarily wrong, right? But I think we need to a bit further qualify this perception of whether Switzerland is actually seen as or can be seen as a water-rich country. And as you mentioned, right, so climate change, of course, is very much affecting the timing, the availability of water resources in Switzerland. We all know that the glaciers are retreating rapidly, and additionally, and maybe even more visibly, seasonal runoff patterns are shifting, and that's very critical here in Switzerland. So we have earlier snow melt, reduced summer water flows, especially on these very alpine and plateau regions. And just to give you one very particular example for this, right? So my family are all farmers, so we grew up on the farms, and in the summer months we do take our cattle to alpine pastures, right? That's a very typical thing to do here in Switzerland to feed. However, in recent years, there was hardly any water on these alpine pastures due to these shifting runoff patterns, with some farmers actually having to fly in the water to the pastures, right, by helicopter. And, this is a very emission-intensive way of getting water, which is only reinforcing climate change and its impacts on water. So, long story short, right? So Switzerland, of course, remains a water-rich country in absolute terms, right? But this perception, which I think I also grew up with in Switzerland, of us being kind of unshakable in terms of water security, that's no longer accurate. We are seeing, a country like ours with plentiful water, but facing more increasing temporal, but also spatial mismatches between availability and need. And I think that also calls for, as mentioned just before, a very much dynamic and tailored approach to water management and location specific. So kind of tying back to what has been mentioned before.
Thank you so much for this answer. I think it's always very interesting and very important to also bring very I mean, if I can say case studies almost to this kind of conversation to really bring the conversation to the concrete effects of this crisis. Turning now maybe to a more hopeful, a more solution-oriented topic, Dr. Fahoudin, what types of water-related projects are most likely to receive funding supports from the Green Climate Fund?
So in GCF, thanks for the question. In GCF, we actually have a water preparation or water project preparation guidance. It has a 3-volume. Please feel free to look at it after my talk. Maybe I will actually put into the chat box the link that could be useful to the country who actually wants to design any water-related project. So if you like to design a water-related project, we look at actually 5 fundamental area that is quite important. One is actually water conservation, water reuse, as well as water recycling, because we believe that if we can actually resolve the non-revenue water loss 50%, we can actually resolve the 50% of our current problem. And if we can do that on the future, you can look at actually what additionality you need to look at based on the future challenges that we'll be facing. And that's why the water conservation, wastewater treatment, reuse of water is quite important. So that's one of the critical area we have to resolve. And that also one of the area that actually we can actually attract to the private sector. Because if you look at the private sector, we are talking over the last maybe 30, 40 years that private sector need to come and play a critical role, right? Everyone actually telling, every forum you go, you'll be listening this particular word, but we are not telling them actually how. So unless you actually tell how, it doesn't actually help for actually how the private sector should come. So you need to understand what is their risk element and what are the de-risking element you are actually bringing out in the market so that actually they could feel a little bit an enabling environment so that actually they could come and invest their money. And that's what actually GCF tried to play a critical role to attracting the crowdsourcing of the financing as well as bringing the private sector. And secondly, there has been a lot of projects we supported through the early warning system for flood and drought because we need to understand the risk. If we don't understand the risk for current risk versus future risk, we'll not be able to actually address how we actually do those adaptation option. And that's why we want to see actually that how an early warning system could help not only just saving people's life or reducing the damage to the property, but as well as how that helps to our national budgetary plan. So that means our finance minister, our minister of finance need to understand actually their budget based on the risk that they face over the year. And then that could actually translate to the sector. Either it could be water ministry or it could be agriculture ministry or maybe other ministry, how their budget should be look like. It cannot be a flat amount every year for their budgetary plan because risk is quite diverse, risk is varies. So their budgetary plan need to be based on more actually risk adverse. And thirdly, we're looking at that more on the integrated water resource management so that actually it helps to the governance mechanism as well as SDG 6 achievement. And fourth one is more on the nature-based solution. So we have a lot of project on the payment-based, ecosystem-based adaptation or nature-based solution for your catchment management so that you can actually have a more natural flow, natural high quality of water as well as water supply, ensuring the water supply. So that's one of the area we also try to support quite a lot. And then the fifth one is more on the looking at the climate resilience wash or climate resilience sanitation. Often when you're bringing a sanitation project, it looks like just you need a peat latrine. But there are actually a lot of interesting science behind of the sanitation, how to reduce the emission, how to do the carbon credit, how can actually create more climate resilience infrastructure into the sanitation. Those are actually we are trying to promote. And obviously the overarching of these five element, we also try to look at a knowledge product, which could be a transformative and which could create a paradigm shift. So the knowledge could be actually learned from one country to another country. So these are the five natural domain we try to fund our program. And each country, even though each catchment has a differential problem, differential needs, and it's a flexible framework. So you can actually come up with a quite nexus approach with linking water, energy, ecosystems. You could put in water, food security, energy nexus, water, energy, urban nexus. It's quite varies. Recently, we just funded a project into the Amazon, and you maybe know that 70% of the moisture in the whole global actually absorbed into the Amazon, which is our sky river. So unless we actually save our Amazon, we cannot actually ensure that actually water availability for food security. And we have actually funded a $391 million project to ensuring that a sort of nexus between the water, energy, waste, urban and rural context, so that actually the local SME, local entrepreneur, as well as community-led adaptation could be supported. And we have more than, I think, 89 projects we supported. Each of in kind is a very unique, like, Nature for Debt Swap, that is one of the first in the market. We have facilities for private sector to come and play a critical role. Those are also quite unique in the market with highly concessional loan, or equity or guarantor instrument. And our loan is quite flexible. It could go like a 0% interest with 40 years tenure. So that actually it create a bankability for any entrepreneur or local investor to create a return on investment kind of ROI. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your answer. So you've mentioned your work with the private sectors, and Dr. Visha, you also have the opportunity to work with numerous private partners in supporting their energy transition. So what are some leading examples of water conservation strategies that go beyond regulatory compliance to create, if I can say, real value or enhance resilience?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think we'll speak on technologies a little bit more in a few minutes, right? So I'll focus on maybe two other examples, again, maybe from a bit of a Swiss lens, right? So my background is in the energy sector, right? And as such, we work a lot with different utilities here in Switzerland, especially also the so-called pumped storage hydropower facilities, which, are able to not only seasonally store electricity, but also, and more increasingly so, also have a very important role to manage water availability during these seasonal fluctuations, which becomes now kind of a co-benefit and kind of a more holistic approach of how we manage the pumped hydro storage facilities in Switzerland to help achieve our energy, but also water resilience targets. And that's kind of one way of where we, of course, go way beyond compliance, just to create a business case for it as well, right? To create kind of less risky situations for all the stakeholders involved along the value chain. Maybe a second very short example is maybe more in the city context, where we do work with lots of the cities here in Switzerland. Zurich, we all know, right, is also more prone to some of these climate change impacts related to, stronger precipitation events, etc. Right. So now they have strongly invested in, many commonly known technologies, right, flood retention basins, green infrastructure to reduce the peak runoff, right, recharge the groundwater at the same time. Also have some co-benefits for biodiversity. So kind of, conserving water while also enhancing this resilience element, this kind of maybe the strongest business case we do have here in Switzerland at the moment, next to kind of some of the technologies which I think we'll speak on in a second, right? Yeah.
Unfortunately, I see that the time is going fast pretty well. So I think we have to close this second panel right now, but I'm sure we have the time to talk about technologies and further question during the Q&A session right after this panel. Thank you so much, Dr. Fahoudin, Dr. Risha, for this engaging and really insightful discussion. I think you've given us a lot to think about, from innovative water strategies, but also the importance of, I guess, integrated approaches. So now, as discussed, we will move into our Q&A session. I think we received several thoughtful questions from the audience, and we'll do our best to address as many as possible in the time we have left. If you haven't submitted your questions yet, it's not too late. Please use the Q&A box on your screen, and we will come back to your question. I think, Asma, there is a first question for our panelists.
Yes. So we've received quite a number of questions, but because of our time constraints, we will only be selecting a few, especially so we don't repeat the same questions but differently. Now, my first question that I can see here from our panel, from our audience, is directed to Miss Alicia. So, Miss Alicia, how can small or resource-limited organizations start implementing responsible water practices without undergoing the full certification?
Sure. So, do we mean the full certification, or are we? And I think this is just to understand where the current what current fixtures, like how does the building, the built environment that it's in. So if it's an office space, is what I think it's asking, because I think I saw this question, is what can they do even if they have all the water efficiency measures in place? What can be done? And hopefully that's the correct understanding of the question. And that's a good question to ask, because a lot of people ask us this. They say, we have a brand new building. It was built to the highest standards of maybe a sustainable certification, or we get a water stewardship. What else can we do? Or we don't want to do those, but what else can we do to conserve water? So I think it's about training, and it's about awareness. And those are the biggest things you can do beyond maybe having the highest efficiency fixtures available, or you might do all the other or many other indicators in different certifications that you meet. But training is big and awareness is big, because I think it doesn't matter if you have the most high-tech solutions, or you've got the best equipment. If people aren't trained how to use it, or if people aren't aware on what it means or the bigger impact, then all of that really won't have as much value. So you need to really think about how you can do the training and awareness and that behavioral change, as well as coupling it with these technologies. This is why I never want us to forget that it's not just technology that's going to be the driving factor. We need to enable that by our training and awareness and our mindset change as well.
Thank you so much, Alisa, for this answer. Talking about technology, we have a question for you, Dr. Vishar. So in a world where technological advancement are accelerating, what emerging tools or technologies are helping to track, reduce, or recycle water use more effectively?
Thanks a lot. I think maybe just a few examples I can give, right? So I think lots of research and development adoption going on here again in Switzerland, but beyond, right? I think we do have technologies with all the buzzwords in it, such as, AI-powered hydrological forecasting. That's maybe one example I want to share a little bit more about, right? So kind of ETH Zurich here, closely involved with that one. We do have a kind of a learning model to forecast snow melt and runoff patterns more accurately, right? That is called the Hydropilot. Helps us to anticipate water availability weeks in advance, and that also helps to better manage and structure reservoir and energy market management, right? It helps kind of all these stakeholders involved, right? And I think maybe just coming very much from a private sector background, I think we do work with lots of these companies, especially pharmaceutical, but also let's say the food and beverage companies, around their closed loop systems for either cooling or then also even zero water technologies that recycle all the water used in production processes, helping them to set up these technologies and processes, have the governance structures around it. That companies like ABB, like Lonza, like Nestle, for instance, can also advance on not only their net zero journeys, but especially also on their water stewardship journeys. That's maybe some examples where technology, of course, helps greatly in terms of advancing the cause and making it a business case. Right?
Thank you so much, Dr. Pascal. That's very insightful. And now my next question, which I think is really interesting from the audience, would be to Dr. Bapon. What do you think is the single most underutilized opportunity in climate smart water management today?
That's a very hard question, but there is actually no single answer for that one because the need is so differentiated by different community, and you need to always actually look for what is a very much fit for purpose technology solution that could actually serve the purpose. and it could be linked with water conservation. It could be linked with behavioral change. It could be linked with risk-based decision making, or it could be looking at accessing the financing point of view. So it could be quite vary actually, as water is quite localized. You cannot just come up with a one-size-fits-all kind of solution into the market. But saying so, innovation is quite important here. We need to look at that aspect, and how actually we can scaling up those kind of innovation is also need to be looked at into the bringing the solution, so that actually people has able to accessibility of those things as well as affordability, but also sustainable. And also it could be culturally and contextually adaptable. Just giving an example, maybe in Jordan, what we actually introduce a sort of like a 3D printing nozzle. It's a low pressure nozzle for the irrigation. And this is actually quite innovative in a sense. Farmers can actually print it in their home, because it's a 3D printer that could be utilized for generating those things. And this has been came out from the MIT lab. But if you look at it in the market situation at this moment, the most of the irrigation nozzle is actually maybe controlled by different countries, and those are actually always a high pressure nozzle, and that's traditionally used. And when you have a high pressure nozzle, that cannot actually support to the solar panel kind of energy. You need to have like a diesel energy to generate those kind of things. So if you want to have like a reducing the carbon footprint, but also bringing a sustainable solution, cheaper, affordable technologies, so you can actually promoting some of these new technologies that could create a greater impact into the community. Similarly, using the advanced IT technologies, or as well as data-driven modeling, you can actually have those kind of platform where actually you can create a whole value chain. Because if you want to create a value chain for user to the supplier, and in a more coherent way, those are the quite important aspect that is actually required, and how we can actually promote those things is quite important.
Thank you very much for this answer. I think we have time for one last question from the audience. This will be for Mr. Thiel. So as with many global challenges such as climate change, vulnerable populations are often the most affected. How does this dynamic manifest in the context of water scarcity, and what way does water scarcity further reinforce existing inequalities?
Mr. Thiel, I think you're muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you please repeat the question again?
Yes, of course. So the person asked, as with many global challenges, such as climate change, vulnerable populations are often the most affected. How does this dynamic manifest in the context of water scarcity, and in what ways does water scarcity further reinforce existing inequalities?
Okay, so as I mentioned before, unfortunately, as per the data that we already have from the research, women and children are the most affected parties, right? And as we said, and as in the documentary that was first shared with you guys, because women are trying to get the water for the households, or fetching water, and all of these, let's say, issues. Usually, we're walking farther and waiting longer, and often sacrificing education or income generating activities in this process. Eventually, leading to also waterborne diseases and health risks, etc. That is, I think it's a cycle in general. Welfare, because in these vulnerable populations, it's getting worse for them. I'm sorry.
No
Lost my
worries.
train of thought.
No worries.
If
Well,
anyone can add to this.
I don't know if any other panelists would like to add to this answer.
I don't. If it's okay, I would like to, and that's just because some of my experiences that I had in Zimbabwe, it was definitely health. Health was a big thing amongst women because they were the most vulnerable because of the water quality, as well as sanitation. So when you think about it, and it's an unpleasant topic to think about and bring up, but the stigma around it should be avoided because, you know, we have menstrual cycles and a lot of women don't have access to the sanitation needed to maintain that during those periods. So it was a big thing as how would they be able to manage that, and that became a health sort of risk to them because they were using water that was of poor quality. So, and then they missed school as well because the waterborne illnesses from, you know, having to drink from some of these water resources that were not of good quality, but it was what is available, as well as it's a risk of traveling far locations to get this water. And that was also sort of a safety risk, whether, you know, it was safety from animals out, you know, in some of these rural areas, as well as safety from others, because, you know, it does become a bit of a issue where you're traveling and, you know, you might be actually trying to get water and so are 1,000 other people. So these are some of the experiences I have seen working in some of those rural areas in Zimbabwe, and how it, you know, it really impacts the children and the moms as well.
Thank you so much for this answer. I think it's always very interesting to kind of talk about also how these challenges affect vulnerable population, because I think it really demonstrates how these challenges, how this issue related to climate change, but also to water scarcity, really are global issues and really do have many effects on many different population, and show just the importance of working on it and making sure that we are able to go through it, and focusing on water conservation. So thank you all for your thoughtful questions and also for engaging in this conversation. We're really sorry if we didn't get a chance to answer every question, if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, but if you'd like to continue the discussion or have a very specific question you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to just email us. We would love to hear from you and continue the conversation. So this brings us to the end of our webinar. We would like to give a heartfelt thank you to our guests for their insightful contribution. I thank your expertise on water scarcity and your hopeful perspective on water conservation really enriched today's conversation. And of course, thank you to all of you for joining us today. We hope these sessions has deepening understanding of the global water challenge we face, and just as importantly, also inspired you to take meaningful action in your own lives and also communities. Before we close, we're really excited to share a small token of appreciation to all of you. So as a thank you for attending, we'll be sending you a free ebook filled with practical tips on water conservation, inspiring case studies, and resources to help you make a difference. You'll receive the link by email pretty shortly after the webinar, so be sure to check your email and make sure to read our newsletter to receive this free ebook. You'll now see a QR code on your screen, and we'd be very grateful if you could take a moment to scan it and complete our short feedback survey. Your input really help us to improve and continue offering really impactful, engaging webinars. Feel free to leave us any comments or suggestions. We'd love to hear your thoughts. This discussion has been really incredibly, I think, inspiring, and we really hope it doesn't stop here. If you'd like to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to us via email or connect with us on social media. We are here on almost every platform: Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and also X. And if you're interested in learning more about our foundation, joining us as a volunteer maybe, or just staying updated on future events, feel free to visit our website, www.gf.foundation. Thank you for being with us today. I'm wishing you a great morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're tuning in from, and really hope to see you again in our next event or webinar. And yeah, thank you so much for attending. Wishing you a lovely day ahead. Goodbye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.